Ms. Lammers? Here. Ms. Gow? Here. Ms. Anderson? Here. Ms. Brosmer? Mr. Burbank? Mr. Fitzsimmons? Mr. Hoblick? Ms. Jamison? Mr. Geronimo? Mr. Lights? Mr. Malmberg? Ms. Morrissey? Here. Mr. Surratt?
Here.
And Ms. Whittick. All right, we do have a quorum, and then also in the room from staff, we have Samantha West, Keith Abramson, Ginger Adair, Ben Bartlett, Morgan Swank, Chelsea Moulton, and Brianna Peterson.
Thank you. Did everybody have an opportunity to read those really good minutes that were easy to follow? No editorializing from me. Would someone like to make a motion that they be approved? Wendy Anderson moves, seconded by Bob Fitzsimmons. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries to approve the minutes from our June 4th meeting. We don't have anyone online. No one's attending remotely. No? Okay.
No, we
so-
just have Chris Ryan from our county attorney's office.
Thank you. We are who we are then, so we can move on to our first agenda item, which is Senate Bill 180. Who is our presenter on this lovely item?
That's going to be me. That is really loud. So the governor signed Senate Bill 180 on June 26th. It does limit the county's ability to, the county is prohibited from proposing or adopting more restrictive or burdensome amendments to its comprehensive plan or land development regulations or procedures concerning review and approval of issuance of site plans, development permits, or developmental orders before October of 2027. The county may also not propose or adopt any moratoriums on construction, reconstruction, or redevelopment of any property damaged by the referenced hurricanes, Debbie, Helene, and Milton. It also does include a provision that anytime there is a hurricane that the tract is with 100 miles, there will be an additional 1-year extension of that the prohibition of doing anything. So really for ENRAC, that is going to limit what you all can do, especially the language including proposing. So that means that while you all could, as a group, come up with revisions to the ordinance, have discussions, go through all of this, you cannot propose that to council. You cannot have workshops with council. We cannot do anything that could be perceived even as proposing these. Even if you did meet with council, they would not be able to comment. So even as of right now, the stormwater ordinance that was passed is now, it now is void. The LID does still stand because it was voluntary. We would potentially have the option to propose changes to the ordinance as voluntary. The only thing I would caution against with that is if you propose something and it doesn't work out the way we're expecting, or it has some kind of unintended consequence, whether we would have the ability to then revoke that after the fact is questionable, because again, you would then be doing something more restrictive while that was something that was out there. So it does limit what you're able to do. So it really is going to be kind of a limiting factor, at least until October of 2027. As they did previously, they did walk back some of the requirements last time around. It's possible that could happen. But again, with the additional language regarding the 1 year after any hurricane event, that obviously is going to be something that's going to continue to be an issue.
For the record, on staff player and then Bart. You can't hear. Okay, there we go. Oh, I used to. Okay. For the records, member Tyler Malmberg has joined us. I think when we just called the order, and Clay Irvin has come into the room, and I think it was Ben. Did we have Ben? Okay. So
Hey, folks,
So
Michelle
to-
Leidig is
to
also
recap,
online.
we could not even, under SB 180, we can't even, we can do our work, we can keep doing our work, but we cannot, other than through, we can have no communication to our elected officials about it whatsoever.
Well, the issue is the language of proposed. So even if you were to bring something up to council, I don't think they could provide you with any sort of response, recommendation, approval, anything saying, please go forward, please don't, because that's going to be a proposed, option. So I think it falls under that. So it does limit you.
So we couldn't even just publish our findings.
I don't think you could, because again, it's a proposal. So it's not just the actual ordinance itself, it's any proposal that would impact and be more restrictive than what is currently there. So anything that was put out there, other than what's done within this room, is subject potentially to being a proposal, and it's void ab initio. So that means it says if it doesn't exist. So
So next question on that is what would be, I guess, the waiting game to see if this would be cured in some way or amended in some way would either be through some kind of special session that the governor who just signed it would have to call, or in the next legislative session. Is that when?
correct, that would be.
Thank you.
And then, so another hurricane within 100 miles comes through and it extends another year? And that's any category 1 hurricane within 100 miles, or how does that work? He's declared a state of emergency, then that.
Thoroughly.
So the elephant in the room is, do we make a motion to adjourn?
Jessica and Tyler.
I think we talked about this a few months ago and knew it was coming. And I think we said we don't want to stop the work, even if we put it together and then hold it. So I thought we were aware that this was gonna happen. And that we were gonna progress. I don't think we knew about the extent because it was still in drafting of the time period.
Tyler.
So I personally have some items that I think could be relaxed in our code that could be looked at. There are items that I've said I'm allergic to, like trees, but that wouldn't be in conflict with this. So I think even beyond the items that we could put on the shelf, there are some term modernization things that we could do. That may not be the popular sentiment of the committee, but that's one opportunity I do see for this.
So couple of thoughts. A couple months ago, to what Jessica said, a couple months ago, when we decided to continue, I personally did not understand that we would not be able to even make a report on what we would have decided and recommended if we were allowed to recommend. Not being able to do that, and knowing that unless there is a change, we can't even make a recommendation until our terms have expired, most of us that are on this committee. So we're losing that. Ginger.
Just to clarify that, I looked that up today. So as it stands right now, everyone's term here expires in September, either September 3rd or September 30th of 2026. But the resolution says each member can serve up to 3 2-year terms. So the original members could be reappointed for one more 2-year term, which would carry through 2028, September of 2028. But there would be a reappointment process in the middle, right? Everybody would need to be reappointed or, you know, council would have to take action in September of 26, which is during the, whatever you want to call this moratorium.
Okay, so that is one, to me, it's a big deal that we can't even make a presentation on this. To tie, and I feel that we're in a conflicted position because we have an approved work plan about what we're supposed to look at from our county council. And yet we cannot take that through to a conclusion. That's more in response to Tyler. Jack, then John, then Sarah Lee, Jessica.
I missed it. The timing is 27, right? When in 27?
October of 2027.
So in October, you know, and you've got the potential of a year on top of another hurricane. So we've got a 2-year window to potentially get another hurricane, which then puts us to a 3-year position. I mean, it is getting pushed out and this is different than we said, we just continue our work. I think we've got to be realistic about this. Odds are 2 years, been 100 miles. I mean, that, you know, realistically, I'm not sure. You know, I'm not sure what we're doing will be effective, you know? I mean, I think we can talk about potential upside or whatnot, but, you know, it's disturbing to think that we go through it with, you know, even if we don't get anything along the way. It's like we put everything in the file folder and wait for the time. And then we pull it out and say, okay, here's our proposal. Things could change in that. I mean, I don't know. I'm discouraged by it. You know, I think it's particularly difficult, not only that we were given the charge to do these things, but the issues within the county itself and flooding and all that and things, you know, where we're talking about serious problems that could all be determined to be difficult for development, which may foster these problems. I think it's, you know, that makes it particularly difficult to me. And there's no clause for an emergency. There's no, you know, there's nothing in there. So this is, you know, it's kind of a blanket position. And I know it wasn't purposefully designed for groups like us, but it sure kind of puts a pretty big hammer there. So if we want to talk about, you know, emotion and what we want to do, you know, I'm not sure which way I go on it, but I feel discouraged thinking I'm going to be here 2, maybe 3 years before we can even propose something that could make a difference. That's why we're here. Off my soapbox.
Thank you. John, Sarah Lee, Jessica, Tyler.
I guess I'm trying to understand what the scope is. I mean, when I look at wetlands, we could have been looking at wetlands without any consideration of storms, because we could be looking at wetlands as an environmental issue, right? I understand, you know, flood hazard mitigation, you know, all that stuff, but wetlands is an area that I don't know why we can't proceed, but I guess it's a question of what the scope is.
Excuse me for interjecting, but our work product is to come up with ordinance recommendations, and right now we can't recommend ordinances. That just to kind of sum that up. Sarah Lee, Jessica.
Okay, well, to clarify, we can't recommend an ordinance that is more restrictive. Okay, and that term restrictive is important. I am extremely discouraged. And in all candor and honesty, it's everything that's going on. Okay. And I think about, so I am not sure I still agree with where we were the last time we discussed this happening. what saddens me a little bit to John's point is we have environmental standards that have not been reviewed and updated, some of which since they were adopted in the mid-80s. And regardless of why the legislature decided to adopt this, the legislation does not allow us to do exactly what you were suggesting, John. Secondly, political appointments. Again, I'm feeling pretty discouraged. I am not sure where we are headed. And knowing that my and all of your terms expire in September of 2026, which is still more than a year from October 2027, we don't even know who's going to be on council. And we don't know what that particular council will want. I mean, honestly, gang, it took the current council a little while to embrace, hey, I think you should make some changes to stormwater and flooding. Like, it took them a little while to catch up. So as much as I enjoy all of you and contributing in a meaningful way, I drive over here. It takes not quite an hour, but almost. And it is a half-day commitment. And I'm sorry, but a little bit to what we were talking about before. I'm questioning the value of my time. Now, Tyler brought something up that I think might be worthy of some discussion. But before I jump there, I forgot what my third point was in looking over at staff. My third point was, and I say this as somebody who was dedicated to a very large organization and supported citizen committees for almost 30 years. This is a huge amount of work for staff to support us, okay? Every single time we meet, it's not just the time in the room that they are spending with us. It's whatever directive we give to them that involves research, extremely time consuming, has a deadline associated with it because we meet monthly, and ends up reprioritizing whatever else they have going on. And I truly don't believe that they are sitting waiting for us to give them directives. I think they have other things going on. So it is not lost on me what kind of commitment the staff has to make. And I have no idea how, staff on it, at any given time, one of us emails and or calls them, and that's additional work, even if it's just conversation. So I think it's incumbent on us to think about that perspective as well as other things. Lastly, I did want to jump on, Tyler brings up something that I think is at the very least worthy of conversation. Because if we thought we could contribute in a meaningful way, productively, that obviously can't be more restrictive, I'd be interested in talking about that. But not trying to be Debbie Downer. I was never that person, but I got to tell you, it's pretty hard right now with everything that's going on.
Jessica, Tyler, Wendy, Bob, John.
One, I think at some point the draft of the bill, and it was taken out to the commentary before, had an exception for stormwater related moratoriums. and that did not make it in the final version. I just checked. I do think that there are some things like wetlands, when we talked about shifting to kind of the state definitions and process, that simplifies the process. So there's a benefit there. But it's a long time. And I'm wondering I raised my placard to say from a procedural standpoint, is it possible, if it's the will of the committee to say, we're pausing because we're kind of inactive, can we talk to council about tolling our terms and say, we can't do anything for a year and a half? We'll restart our terms as they are now at that time.
Yeah, I did bring that up as an option to leadership, and Morgan was gonna look into, how would that work? Ultimately, whether the committee continues is up to the county council, right? But this discussion about your thoughts is important, I think, to them. So, yeah, I think there are a couple options. Keep going and just don't make any official recommendations. The council could say, we don't need ENRAC anymore and disband it. Or I think there's that third option, which is maybe go on hiatus and pause everyone's terms. And so like maybe in January of 27, if we haven't had a storm and it hasn't moved out a year and all the ifs, then, start again in preparation for October, right? Because we know it takes a little while to get a thing done. That could be one option. And if everyone's terms could just stop, if you would still be eligible to come back if at that time you still wanted to, right? I mean, that's a long way away, things happen, but I think maybe that's the third option.
Thank you, Tyler, Wendy, Bob.
Thank you, Bill. Didn't realize quite how comprehensive the communication bans were. It's crafted in a way that I expect it won't end in 2027. I kind of agree with the expectation of us being in a declared emergency. They include more counties than they have to typically, for the purpose of if there is something somewhere that comes up, we can get reimbursed for it. So just looking at reality, our original charter, we probably can't fulfill. And so I think to some extent, we do need to go to council and ask them, is there some other area of the goal of finding ways to better prevent flooding, better protect our natural resources, that our committee can add value? And if not, how do we, proceed? I kind of agree. Like I spent at least a week full time of my time trying to put together stormwater code last year that's now in the trash. And, however valuable that may be, to me, it's painful to see your work get killed. So I share that sentiment. I see a few limited things that we can still do with, I use the term relaxing, it could just be streamlining. And so one of the questions that I have is, can we make things cost more, but easier to get to a permit? I mean, so with trees, like, can we make it more of a replacement cost, less of a protection of existing, but there's a bigger fee with it?
I would say no, because it talks about you can't adopt anything more restrictive or burdensome. So if
okay.
you're increasing a fee, that's a burden. So I would say that no, we probably can't do that either.
Okay. So I'm trying to play attorney here, and that's not my skill set, but yeah. Anyway, that's why I'm asking the attorneys. But so I think we have really limited opportunity to do much. And I think that there's a level of compromise that's required for almost any of the changes that I would be suggesting to actually, be codified, that we're cut off from. That staying where we are with code is probably what we're going to be stuck with. So the question is, are there components of other county programs that we bring any value to? To me, if not, I'm kind of in agreement that I don't see our path forward. And I know that Echo and Volusia Forever have a lot of money behind land acquisitions and other things. And I don't know if that's something that, is fully supported or not, but that may be, and I don't know what I don't know, but that's kind of the question, is what would council like to see from us?
Wendy, then Bob, and thank you, Tyler.
So I understand Sarah Lee's point. For all of us, our time is valuable. We're professionals. We have lots of other things we, could be doing with this time, same for me. I definitely appreciate everything I have learned being on this committee, learned from all of you, learned from staff, and, and the other people who have been brought in. And and I think it has helped us, in many ways beyond the proposals that come formally from this committee, in just having conversations with with our representatives to help them make better decisions as well. So, I mean, I think that the time has been well spent in many ways. I agreed with Tyler's original point this morning or this afternoon, that we do still have a lot of housekeeping work to do. The stuff that hasn't been looked at for 30 or 40 years that probably just needs some tidying up. So maybe we have a couple, 3 more months worth of work just to do some of that. We did leave a lot of stuff hanging with the tree chapter. To Jack's point, I think that, yes, it is a realistic expectation that there will be more storms. But to me, that's exactly why we have to keep at it. There will be more storms. This is our new normal. We do need better policies that respond to this changing weather pattern. And at some point, the state will have to acknowledge that it is time to update. So I just wanted to spend a moment to remind us, and please, forgive me if I get my history wrong. I'm going to play the I'm not from here card, but it's my understanding that after Hurricane Andrew and then the hurricanes in 2004 that we had big leaps in advances in Florida building code, right? And I'm just going to guess that maybe builders were a little bit unhappy or angsty about having to, change everything about how they operate. But you know what? That's the new normal. And because of that, we have a more resistant and resilient product, out there on the landscape now. Like that was a good thing. After Hurricane Irma, the state required the utilities to harden their infrastructure, even allowed the utilities to pass that cost on to ratepayers for better or for worse. I'm not saying I agree with it, but I mean, the state has time and time again made actions to help this state respond better to these natural disasters. And so it is baffling to me that, that Senate Bill 180 is saying, you can't make your communities more resilient. I'm wondering, and again, I'm just speculating, I'm wondering if the state has some intention of actually creating state level statutes that have to apply to everybody that will increase the standards for stormwater. Like maybe we don't need to piecemeal this county by county, city by city. Maybe there's something bigger coming from the state. I doubt it, but if you look at the past, that has been the pattern. Like they have actually brought forth those things. I mean, is this something we need to be lobbying our delegation to Tallahassee for? So I mean, I'm not that discouraged by it because maybe there's something better coming. Maybe I'm just being Pollyanna. But on the other hand, maybe we won't have another storm in the next 2 years. Maybe the people who are seated on the council starting in 2027 will have the wherewithal to jump right on the proposals that ENRAC has been, kind of, steaming away, trying to make, ready for action. And, and as Ginger said, it takes a minute to get this work done. And in 2027 will be here before we know it. So I guess I would just appeal to all of us to stay the course, to continue the work we're doing. Maybe don't hesitate to take a month off every now and then if it's Christmas or or something where a lot of us are going to be gone. Like maybe we drop back to meeting every other month or something. But there is work to be done, and at some point we are going to need to have these changes in place. So would encourage us to continue.
Thank you, Wendy. Bob, then Jessica, then Melissa.
So unlike Tyler, I'm not allergic to trees. I probably should be, but I'm not. And Tyler brought up a good point, and I think we have some agreement on it, and that is that there are probably a lot of things that can be done to streamline, to modernize, without creating a burdens, anything more burdensome or adding new regulations, and really focus on helping staff do their job and meet their objective in a more sensible way. We probably have, the ability to do that and propose things along those lines. So I would kind of think that, and I think you said this, Sarah Lee, that, or we've got to go back to council and get direction. And we probably need to get together and kind of brainstorm a little bit and go, what is it exactly we think we can do, where we value our time? Because I'm with you, Sarah Lee. I mean, this is a half a day commitment. I've got lots of things on my agenda I could go do right now. But I'm here because I'm hopeful that we can contribute something. So yeah, I'm definitely open to discussion. I definitely would like to see us move forward if we can put together a mindset of where we're going to go. We take that to council and see what happens.
I was gonna say, I think there are also pieces of it that are unknown and will probably remain unknown for quite a bit until lawsuits happen, for interpretation or a special session, or the early session next year starts in January. Because one of the things is we talked about fees, and I've always read the statute as not including things like impact fees, regular increases for infrastructure, but then where does that line fall? And I know at some point we have talked about whether there needs to be a stormwater program fee and changes there, and whether that would be included or not is a question we won't have the answer to until somebody asks it to a court. But I do like the thought of taking some time to clarify and simplify the things we can. Wendy said 3 months. I don't know, it's a little fitting if we keep rolling with that and we end in October and take a year toll, then we're back at October 2026 and see what we can do. Right. So,
So what this committee, thank you, Jessica, what I think every single person on this committee has in common is that we care a lot about our community. That's why we're here every month, month after month after month. And whatever difference of opinion we may have, we're here because we have a drive to serve, as do our staff members, who are public servants. And I want to thank every one of you for that. I am beginning to, we're all kind of thinking the same things. What, is it worth our time to continue? And if we do continue, what should we do? I'm starting to fall into the camp of, yes, we do have to go to council and we should have a proposal to them about what it is that we think we can do to add value if we find what that is. And that will be mindful of staff time as well, so that it's of benefit to the community, because that is what we care about, again, to devise what it is that we might suggest to them that we could do. And if we come up with something, great. And if we don't come up with anything, then we could ask for the pause. Because I think what does set our work on this committee apart from the work that many of us do in other areas of our lives is actually being able to effect a change, which we don't do when we're just advocates, which many of us are in other areas of our life. So I like the idea of, let's figure out if we can add value at all and take it to council. Thank you. Jack Bob Bill.
Thanks.
Sound like a mom.
I agree. I mean, we need a proposal to them. I think they may come back and say, yeah, I got an idea. How about you ENRAC guys hitting the road? They wanted to do that before, they'll do it again. But without that consideration, this probably has its own problem. But, one of the things that bothers me is not just the timing, but as we work through them and we get these things, then we've got to grind it, until we come up with that. and I hope there's not another hurricane. And, it's like the implementation has to happen pretty quickly. And if you remember, like when we went through this before and then it got pulled back and we said, oh, we should have a greater sense of urgency. Well, it didn't happen. I mean, we didn't get there until this happened now. Right. But if we were to go through it and streamline, I like those ideas, although I wonder if any of them will be interpreted as being restrictive when we get down to it. It's streamlined, yeah, but it's got restrictions, and who interprets that? But what if we were to move on just like we're working now, knowing we can't do it, knowing it's not going to work, and put it in a voluntary sense? In other words, propose it to be voluntary, okay, knowing no developer is going to restrict themselves, but basically put it in place to trigger when in fact an opportunity presents itself. Because it's almost like we're starting over when the gates are open and we start working and working and working and it doesn't happen. So could you put it in a voluntary position, not unlike we've done before, and then make it mandatory when in fact the opportunity presents itself and county council agreed?
Bob, Tyler?
Just to comment on Jack's thoughts for a second, the voluntary, we've watched that over the years not work very well. And incentives sometimes work depending on the incentives. So, combination thereof. But the other thing that I was going to say is, maybe trying to figure out what we want to be, who we are, that, we all submit, and I'm sorry that creating more work for staff, yeah, Morgan's got hers up. Our thoughts on what we might be able to accomplish along these lines, so that we can put together something.
Thank you, Bob. I think our legal would like to orient us a little on these things.
So 180 doesn't have the ability for future triggers. So if we did it voluntary, it would have to be voluntary, and then we would have to go back after the fact, after it's expired, after October of 2027. The other concern with something like that is if we put it voluntary and it has an impact that we didn't foresee, or it does something we don't anticipate it doing, we may not be able to walk that back, because then anything we do after the fact is more restrictive. So if you put something out there that's voluntary, it has some unintended consequence, we're kind of stuck with that potentially. So it could, again, that's just thinking kind of broad terms, but that's something that could be a problem.
Tyler, Bill?
Thank you again, Bill. What it sounds like to me is the only thing that we can do on the code side would be additional options of paths to a permit or to compliance. So we have the rule that's today. And if we were looking at modifying the rule and making part of it softer and part of it more strict, we could do maybe an or and say you either meet the rule or you pay, or you provide, XYZ of additional mitigation or some other. Isn't that exactly what the LID stuff that was voluntary incentivized criteria did?
But it's totally voluntary. You're talking about an or like with fees or something that we couldn't do anything that's more burdensome.
So you can do the current code, or you can do this other thing. So that or is a voluntary fork in the road that a developer would face. So if there, and I'm thinking about I'll be specific to the tree item. I really hate that we protect large laurel oaks as specimen trees to the extent that we do. I think that some of them are probably specimen trees, some of them are not. I think we should have more codified methods to bypass the protection of some of those trees personally. So right now, that's not more burdensome. However, I don't think that necessarily the whole committee would agree with the position that I would want. So recognizing that there's some compromise that would probably be necessary in finding a path, it's I don't think a tree that's going to live another 30 to 40 years is something that should be considered a specimen tree. That's my personal opinion on it. And so how do we get something that's going to live 100 years or 200 years and provide the alternative path while still leaving the original rule as like an optional path to the permit? And I think I think all of our code areas probably have some, it's like an additional chute to get to the permit.
Bill, then Melissa, then Keith, or I'll Keith go before.
So, can somebody remind me how it got walked back last time?
There was a special session and they revised it to say that it only applied to a smaller subset.
And then, I really did like the way that we went ahead and made it voluntary, and we did succeed on the LID. We do have a bill, an ordinance, and people are gonna try it out. I'm probably not very interested in being on it to work through additional, restrictions and then put it on the shelf. I don't think that's probably, never getting to the end just doesn't seem palatable to me. But if we could do some voluntary stuff, I might be worthwhile to do that.
Keith, Jessica, then Melissa.
The tree ordinance seems to be getting beat up today. The tree code already has that built into it. I am hearing a lot about the codes that we have. The codes that we have, in my opinion, are actually pretty good. To be honest with you, yeah, I haven't seen a specimen tree waiver turned down in years. So I think it's less of an issue. I will state that we have a directive from council already, and it's not less protection.
Jessica, then Melissa.
I think when we're thinking about proposals to council, my hesitation on creating things now that can't be looked at 2 years from now includes the fact that that is 2 legislative sessions away. That is 2 major potential changes in stormwater rules or any other regulation that we will, it's not a waste of time, but we are creating a product that then can't be used. The county has a lot of master plans that are no longer valid. We have a lot of rules that, need to be updated. So that would be my caution on continuing through the entire list, is by the time we get to the end of it, what we did may not be usable.
I guess my question is as much for Morgan as anybody. Some of the things that we were talking about in the last 10 minutes or so would in some ways modify what we were created by resolution, and how much of a departure we'd be making from that resolution and still be within the resolution. In other words, guidance, if we do try to come up with something to take to council as a proposal, we think we can do this work, we think it'll take us 3 months, and then we pause, or whatever our proposal would be, does what fits under that resolution that created ENRAC?
Well, and that would be something you'd want to have in the motion for council, going through what you think you can do and what direction they're willing to give you. And then the resolution may need to be addressed, but that would be, I think, based on what council directs you to do, what they want to have happen. So.
Okay, so being practical. We could begin to whiteboard things that we might be able to do over the next month or 2, and then go to council and say, look, we can't do exactly what our establishing resolution asked us to do or tasked us with doing. We think we could do this. We think it has value because of XYZ. And then they could vote to modify the resolution or to pause us or to disband us. Yeah.
Yes, they can make the decision on how to proceed.
just as a reminder, here are the duties as set forth in the resolution. The committee shall work with the professional staff of Volusia County in recommending minimum standards for the protection of the environment under applicable provisions of the Volusia County Charter and for making recommendations on the corresponding implementing ordinance. Of course, council has, over time since the resolution went into effect, given specific direction, right, to pay attention to stormwater or pay attention to the floodplain. So the first task is changes to the minimum standards to protect the natural resources, protect the environment, and then corresponding changes to 72. And the changes to Chapter 50 would be a little weird, right? Like, if we're talking about saying maybe it's less restrictive or maybe it's streamlining or something in Chapter 50, then that means cities have to potentially change their codes, right? And then the cities may be bumping up against like interpreting how it fits with 180. So, if you're looking for, here's how we feel like we could be effective while 180 is in effect. I think those would most likely be Chapter 72 changes, not Chapter 50 changes, right? And, if you're thinking about the work that we've done so far, I mean, of course, the stormwater work that you did and got adopted by council, that's now voided, unfortunately, because the bill says anything adopted since August of 24, so it's retroactive. So we think about some of the other things we've talked about, though, that maybe haven't gotten all the way through council. Some things we talked about streamlining, like we could add new MAM into the wetland code, and we could, we talked about organizing the tree code in a way that if you're, doing a single family tree permit, these are the sections that apply to you. And so there are those things. The question is whether you go through the entire process of opening up your code, modifying your code, all of the things, or for those items, when we can still work with the code that we have. We've been working with it forever, right? So I think there is a little bit of a cost benefit there. Like there are some of those things you could do, and I think you could probably get past the 180 test. Although I don't know like what that looks like. Like legal would have to really be looking at, okay, does this in any way, could someone interpret it as not meeting 180? But there is the cost benefit. Are those changes worth, is the juice worth the squeeze on that, right?
Play Jessica Melissa.
As the outgoing guy, I just want to say this. Right now, no one knows what the hell 180 is going to do to local governments. We had Deltona the other night approve a moratorium in face of their attorney saying, don't do it. So I think we're going to get a quick answer out of that. I think that may set up giving this group more parameters to work within. At the very least, you're going to have to send something to the council. Whatever you send has to be created by this group. Right now, you need to kind of come to a consensus as to if we're going to continue on what your mission is. What I'm hearing is a discussion on the standards and processes to see what could be done to improve the efficiency, streamlining, and bring them up to date. That's a valid function. It sounds like it's consistent with our interpretation of 180. That could be something that you send forward. So then that way, while we're waiting for the courts to work through on Deltona's moratorium, we could take it from there. Once Deltona's moratorium decision is clarified, then we will have better direction. And more importantly, y'all as a standing board that's, candidly, in 26, you've got county elections, you've got national elections, you got other things going on that may shape the direction you get from a council that's going to be sitting come January 2027. So that's just something I would put in your ear to think about as you're going forward, so that way you're making the most efficient use of your time now, and being able to have the far sight for the long play.
Thank you, Clay. Jessica, Melissa, then Tyler.
I was gonna say, I think in terms of the proposal to council, when we look at kind of shaping the efficiency side of things, if we go that route, I don't know that the current structure we have is needed. And I will say that because staff can do that on their own.
Yep.
You guys don't need us to micromanage the draft ordinances. So maybe it's one meeting or two to say, here are the ideas we have that we would like to see for streamlining. And then we put it in your hands while we take a pause because we've given direction. And I don't know that there is value in us sitting here combing line by line on creating more efficiencies in the code. I think that's an inefficiency.
Thank you, Jessica. My comment was kind of along those lines. The work that was done, we were confronted with the problem that regarding low impact development, there were ordinances that were already supportive of low impact development techniques, and there were ordinances that were blocks, that were barriers to employing low impact development techniques. Staff did the work to find those things. Staff did the work to write the manual that I think is wonderful because it appears to be kind of one-stop shopping. And when we talk about something like the tree ordinance, the ordinances are confusing to comb through because they're written as ordinances. They're not written for a layperson to understand. They're all for Jessica. And exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, we give direction on things like that, and we approve it. I would call the low impact development sort of a streamlining, but we don't do that work. The work that we have done as a committee is to hear the pros and cons of different changes to ordinances and in great detail discuss those and come up with a recommendation of what an ordinance should be, which is a different kind of work. And Clay just made the case for hanging tight a bit. That's what I'm hearing. Things are going to shake out. We don't know how they're going to shake out. Let's not be premature in saying all is for naught. Let's go into it with our eyes open and do a few things that we can do, like directing to change the language to you, ma'am, when it comes to wetlands. The other thing, and I'm sorry to bring this up, but if we think about stormwater, floodplain, and wetlands, we watch those council meetings, meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting of inflamed and hurting fellow citizens who were suffering the impact of flooding on their property. And that drove the council to belatedly recognize that ENRAC actually had something to do to update those ordinances and those standards. I don't know what the public's going to say about 180 when they understand what's happened, when they understand that they've been stripped of their protections. I don't know what the public would say if they heard the recommendations that we've already made about floodplain. We still had more things to do, a bit more, and we had a bit more things to do about wetlands. But we've been working for our fellow citizens in that and for the council. And so that, in a way, I'm kind of not, you kind of turn me around, Mr. Irvin. I'm kind of like, there's still value in doing a little bit more of this work and defining what we can do, as we've just said, defining to council what it is we think we can do to add value, but also maybe going forward with the task that we had set out for us for today, floodplain and wetland, because these are very relevant topics and needs in our community right now. And maybe things change swiftly and those recommendations can be acted upon. I don't know, perhaps I'm being naive, but Keith is telling me I'm being naive. He's laughing at me. Spit it out, Keith. So that's just something else to consider. Some people actually watch these meetings. Thank you.
Wendy said something earlier I really agree with. This has been a really educational committee for me to be a part of. I think all of us have learned a lot. I think that it has brought value in what we've worked on in the conversations at council. I think we have, to an extent, served a purpose that has been somewhat the rug pulled out from under us, so to speak. I am having trouble seeing a beneficial purpose that justifies the amount of work of staff and all of us to be present for these meetings that can't be handled through other processes that are in place. I fully agree with Jessica's sentiment on that. And that's why I raised my placard, is just hearing the comments. I'm coming into agreement. What I do see is there are still some non-development items that nag me in my brain that could be worked on, that I do see maybe a purpose for us to not say we're done, to have a sharing of some potential notes, to have a brainstorm, like a 1 hour type of meeting next month, and go to council. Tell them in the time period, we're going to look at what we can do, but if you guys have any other ideas, we'd also be open. Because I personally also believe irrigation is a big problem. I still think that our use of turf grasses that require such substantial irrigation is a problem. I've had a couple people that have asked me to come look at the flooding that they've experienced. And the first thing I observe when I get out of my truck is that their sprinklers are running. Their lawns look amazing, but their house floods. And so I have these things that I go, okay, well, I'm probably not going to be the engineer you hire at the end of this conversation, but let's have it. I can't help but think that there are items that we could work on. They're just going to be really limited. And it's not what's in our approved work plan. 100% of a path forward that I see, unless we disband, requires us to go to council. And just bluntly, I'm not prepared to put all my ideas forward today. I want to try to poke holes in them first. So, that's my 2 cents. If I were to make a motion, it would be that we plan to do some homework for next month. And I would also ask that staff look at what we have in the work plan that they have already put together and see what of it could still be viable. Just take the red marker through everything. And I don't want to make a motion yet because I don't want it to shut down conversation, but that's kind of the direction I think we should go.
Mr. Irvin, take this out of our pain.
Well, as Tyler was making his point, I asked Morgan, is restricting the amount of sod that can be on a single family lot more restrictive or less restrictive than our current code? And so that's the unfortunate thing, is that the language that was utilized by the legislature in coming up with this law is horrible. And so it's created a really bad situation for locals. The other thing that I wanted to point out that I completely forgot to make sure y'all are aware of, the Growth and Resource Management Department last year hired a firm, Plant Moran, to come in and do a full-scale analysis of what we do. And they've identified changes in regards to process and effectiveness and everything else that we're in the midst of implementing. So in regards to process and requirements, we're already given the directive by the council, and we already have the plan in place, and we've already started the implementation. So what I see as far as value is looking at what's already been covered, identifying those changes that could be potentially made at this point, and bringing those forward to you next month, so that way y'all can make a final decision, and then presenting something to the council, asking them for direction.
Is anyone interested in turning something like that into a motion? Or would we like to have more discussion?
Hey, Melissa, this is Michelle. I'm online. Can you hear me? Hello?
Jessica, I'm either gaveling out or you're going to say something.
I say, I'll try. No, nobody else put placards up. And we can discuss it after a motion is made, I suppose. But right now, I would lean towards what Tyler was saying and make a motion that we adjourn a little early today. So that Keith can go on vacation, part of the official motion. And come back next month with our ideas of topics in the code that we would like to see streamlined that we could work on, along with any questions we have to council on further direction for us. Because I do think there are some unique things that we could be tasked with that are outside of the land development code or comp plan specifically. Meet next month and put that together with the intent that at the end of next meeting, we will have a proposal to take to council. I'm trying to think of dates, maybe in September.
It would
final
be
review.
the September 16th meeting would be the first one
Okay.
that you would be able to get to. Potentially.
Was that a,
It was a very long motion.
okay.
Yeah.
When do I get to ask if you would consider an amendment to that motion? Okay, I'm going to ask if you would consider.
I say it has to.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Tyler. Would you consider amending that just a little bit to include also asking staff to come back with what they think we could address?
I will amend it. Will my second amend it? Great. We have an amended motion.
Made by Jessica Gauss, seconded by Tyler Malmberg. All those in favor? Aye. Anybody again? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. So we have concluded our business for today. Bill Lights?
Clarify, so we're going back, looking at things that we can do positively or streamline, and then staff's gonna look at it, and then next week, month, we're going to decide and then take it to council. Okay.
That is correct. Nobody leave just yet, please. One, I haven't yet adjourned. If it's okay, if you really, we can adjourn, but I would ask you to stay for just a moment. So I'm adjourning the meeting officially and asking you to stay for a moment, including Mr. Irvin. What? Recorded?